We are lighting the candle, a world that works. And I'm Bill Correll, and I am here with one of my wonderful partners in life, Jan Jeremias. And the two of us will have a conversation like we usually do. And I think we're both sitting here smiling at each other because we've gotten so used to, over the last 2 and 3/4 years or so, of hearing the recording coming on and saying, please notice that we're going to be recording now, or something of that nature. And so that lets us know that it's showtime. But
Mhm.
actually, between a couple of friends like ourselves, it's never showtime. We just talk, and have a good time.
I love that idea of showtime because it really makes no difference because we smile and we get like together anyway. So,
I know. But see that, and that's one of the really cool things about being such good friends. I was smiling just thinking about you getting on, looking for your link to get onto this so that we could record.
hmm hmm
So,
so
I'm wide open for conversation today. I do know that I've had some over the last couple of weeks. Both my wife and I have been very ill with some kind of a respiratory bug, and I'm on day, I think, 6 of antibiotics. I've got another full week to go, and I'm actually feeling not so bad. And I went through the bod wash and I took a nice hot shower about an hour and a half ago. That felt pretty good. But
hmm hmm
but in the meantime, without spending too much time kind of reflecting on that, I'm ready to have a conversational um, interaction with another human being. I've been on Facebook a lot over the last week or so because that doesn't require that I do anything other than type. And coincidentally, I've also been in Facebook jail. There's some heinous crime that I committed where they will no longer let me post on other people's walls until I think 3:47 on Wednesday. I get out of jail. But I have a feeling all this is when I'm posting something that I know another person would be really interested in my comments at the top, I will just put their name so that it will post onto their. Uh,
hmm
and I've been doing this for over 10 years. This is not a big deal. Everyone does it every day. I have no idea what's going on. So,
I'm not
but
on Facebook that much, so I can't say that I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's not my predominant, it's not my dominant social um kind of posting. And so I said, I'm sorry to hear that, but part of me is like, I can't relate, but
it's actually not upsetting me or changing my life all that much, except for it's a nuisance.
right,
I
right.
I have a bazillion. I mean, I think the actual amount. I'm 5,000 friends and followers, and I would say out of that probably are just under 100 relatives all across the United States, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And the other nuisance side to it is that March is our most birthday intensive month in the family.
Mm,
And we've got several days in March where we have multiple people's birthdays on the same day, right?
mhm, mhm,
So I think with all of that, it's kind of interesting, how technology and especially cell phones and that sort of thing they're designed to make communicating with people a lot easier. And oftentimes I find that the phone actually gets in the way of communication. Either with reception or just something that's not properly working.
mhm,
But you know, the joke is here we are, 30 years after they developed an affordable cell phone that we could carry around that didn't weigh 10 pounds. We still can't make a telephone call, but we can do all sorts of other things with it.
right, right, right.
So what's been going on for you, my friend?
I guess what I wouldn't mind talking about today because I just think that I tried to, this came to me about what we are here for people. And then um based on this, so I have a new friend, which is when technology gets to be really great, and she is in India. And the other day we were on a call together, and it is a group of people, um guy who organizes, and we get on, we talk about various topics about emotional resilience and all this other stuff. But we were talking about health and, like, you know, our health habits and trying to stick to it and everything. And so all of a sudden we were in a breakout room, because he does breakout rooms of two people, which is actually kind of nice, for like 8 minutes. And afterwards we messaged each other almost at the same time. Like, I don't know, I might have been my idea, but it doesn't really matter. I said, do you want to be accountability partners for each other? Because we were talking about some of the challenges, like, some of the things in our wellness journey or health journey that we find really easy to do, and other things which we don't. And she was like, oh, I'd love that. So we've been sending messages via WhatsApp for like the past 2 weeks to each other about like our progress each day and what we've done as far as, what we're trying to work on. And just this whole idea of accountability partners or accountability buddies, and how powerful it is. And I thought to myself, well, that's kind of like what we are for our listeners. We're their accountability buddies. Like, they can come and they can reach out to us if they want, and they can say they need help with something. But that whole idea of having somebody who's a little bit, I want to say, at a distance, that they're not going to coddle you, and the fact that, they don't, like, if you don't do something, they might say, oh, that's okay. But it's a little bit different, because I think you feel like you are more on task or more diligent, because you have them to, like, you have to check in with them, and you don't want to say you didn't try or you didn't do it. So you tend to do it. So that's what I was thinking about.
I like that, and I think the whole notion of accountability buddies. I Over the years, since I'm a certified business and personal coach, life coach, whenever I hear that two people are in a coaching relationship as accountability buddies, my first question is any money changing hands? And when they say no, it's not, then I say, okay, so you're not looking for a monetary outcome, are you? And they say, well, yes, I am. But I said, but when was the last time it cost you money if you didn't do what you said you would do with an accountability buddy? So what you're talking about is that really cool relationship in accountability buddies, where the first thing is to help you remember when you forget, you know, that, oh my God, it's like I came on earlier today, about 10 minutes ago before you got on, and I looked at my calendar for the first time in probably a week to find out that I have another meeting that I scheduled 3 weeks ago that's coming up at 3:30 today. And it's not a secret from people that I haven't been feeling very well for the last 2 weeks. So I sent a quick message and said, "Are we still on?" And of course, the answer was yes, unless you're not up to it. And I said, "Well, I'm obstinate today, and I just want to go for it." Then the next level, in terms of the accountability, is the remember forget phase. And then the next one afterwards, is kind of like, there's the listen and express. And that's where, when you're talking about whatever it is, just thinking about how that conversation is going to go, there are certain things that will come into your mind, and in many cases, it'll come down to, like, what sort of things can we talk about that will bring value to that conversation and make it
Mhm.
worthwhile, especially if you're talking to somebody in India, or in another time zone, in another country. That's inconvenient, and it's got to be kind of cool, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I actually really love it, because part of the reason I love these, where we met, it was this whole idea of, as we sit in conversation with each other about certain topics of, like I said, it could be, um, emotional resilience and how we handle, some sort of conflict or something, conflict resolution or whatever, is you realize that everybody goes through the same thing. And everybody has, the same things that they deal with basically. And maybe the circumstances are slightly different, but it just, I think it makes you feel sometimes more normal, because I think sometimes we feel very alone, and we feel very much like we're the only one in the world that feels like this.
Yes.
And so in that way, I think it's really nice to have somebody, you know, across the world who you kind of resonate with, that is possibly going through things that don't necessarily apply to you, but you can relate and you can still support. So for example, she's a mom of two, an infant and another child. Now, you know, it's not my stage of life. And I think it's good for me to be around somebody like that, just because I think that when I then have other people I work with or I have clients with or I collaborate with who are in that situation, I think it gives me something to refer back to. Like, remember, they have children at home, which I don't necessarily think of because I don't. And, so I think in that way, it's really nice because it makes everybody, I don't know, it makes you a little bit more human in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing too that I'm hearing that may be going on with you and your friend is the whole notion of having somebody that you can just think out loud with without trying to process it and trying to predict what you're receiving of it is going to look like. That trust, that comes between friends of a certain age. And I don't mean your physical age. I'm talking about your friendship is of a certain age. When you've gotten through a period of time where you start to develop a little bit of respect for each other, and an expectation that it's going to be a special conversation. Those are cool people to look forward to chatting with.
Hmm. And just the fact that just, it's not like, yes, we tend to be on the same meeting every week, and it's very rare that we're not. And then she gets on my LinkedIn audio event usually on Fridays that I do. So, but that sometimes, depending on whether you want to participate, she might be just listening. But there is this feeling of like when we check in, like I said, the fact that, someone out there is keeping track in addition to what I'm doing of what I said I'm going to do and holding me to it. Because I think it's very easy for us in our lives as we get busy to push things that are important, but all of a sudden something in our head thinks that something else is more pressing. And, you know, and it still reminds us to kind of say, okay, well, I can take 5 minutes to do this or 10 minutes to do this.
Yeah.
And can I do something even if it's not that? So maybe it's not, but it's some sort of effort along that path. So I like right now, being in the US, my focus of the past like few weeks has been getting my taxes done.
Yeah.
So I'm very focused on that. And so all of a sudden I'm like, okay, do I have time, or all my free time I'm kind of allotting to that? But, still have to take care of myself, and I can't totally ignore, everything else in my life because I have to get that done. So,
Yeah. And with everything else that goes on in your life, there are more than two or three topics per month for you, I'm very sure. So,
mm,
looking forward to these weekly conversations with somebody that you know, like, and trust. Um, it's kind of a self-affirming process in terms of, being able to shift your mind off of whatever else is going on into what were we talking about last time, and do I have any experience with that conversation in terms of things that may have occurred this week that would be share worthy, where we could actually talk about something that happened. But the other thing that I think is really kind of cool too is the whole notion of making and keeping promises. I feel, and I don't have a lot of experience other than my own personal observations, but I feel, and I'm judgmental about what I observe in the world with people very quickly making promises and then very quickly coming up with excuses the next time you see them a month later, as opposed to, hi, how are you doing? I told you I would call you on Thursday. I didn't call you. And it's my intention to keep my word, intact with you, and that it will mean something if you hear me make you a promise. So I'd like to be able to make a new promise. Will that work for you? Can you imagine if people just talk to each other that way all the time?
Hmm. No, I mean, I actually, and yeah, and that's a different kind of like, as we're referring to this word, that's a different kind of accountability. And
Yeah.
that's basically being accountable for the fact that, you said you were taking responsibility. So in that way, you're being accountable. And I think that that's a way that people gain respect,
Yes.
because I think if people get used to you basically not carrying through with what you said, there is an element of distrust that comes in. And people are, if they're a client, all of a sudden they're like, well, I don't really want to work with you. And there's also not only this element of distrust, there's this element of, um, I don't really, I don't know. Is there's distrust, I think, that, and that influences our business, let's say in the formation of deadlines. It's like making promises that you can't keep, or and sometimes we do that, we're overly zealous, and we all of a sudden we kind of say we'll get something done, and then we go back and we look at the amount of work or whatever, and then we're like, there's no way I can get that done in that amount of time. But actually owning that too, and saying, after going back and looking at, after reviewing what we went over and looking at what everything that needs to be done in this, in this project or in this avenue, there's, I think we need to come up with a new, like, due date or a new date to get together again. Um, because there's no way, and you don't even have to say there's no way. You could just say after looking at it, because I think there is a way also to phrase that,
Yeah, the whole notion of, well, I thought this was going to work for me, and now I look at it and I see that I've got a built-in conflict here. How about we work out another time frame, or you tell me what would work better for you? But back on what I was saying before, my street level observations of how people behave with each other in business and networking and what have you, that their intentions are good, and they
Mhm.
also believe that it's good to overcommit, and like there is such a thing as overcommitting. There is no such thing. There's either committed or not committed. Okay. It's like the pregnancy issue. You is or you ain't. Okay. There's no like levels of pregnancy. It's the same thing for, of being committed. But, the notion that people have to remember what they said the last time so that they can give you a handful of mitigating circumstances that kept them from keeping their promise. That's a lot like work, and I can't even imagine what's going on in folks' heads while they're trying to pay attention to something going on in front of them, while they've got this sea of unkept promises that little, it's like those promises and the words that you say get attached to objects in the world. Sometimes they're people. Sometimes our best sticky notes are folks that we see every few months, and we tell them, okay, so I've started this new eating plan that I'm on, and it's my intention by my birthday to have lost 25 pounds, and here's how I'm going to do it and everything. And it seems like for the rest of our lives together, the first time I see them, every single time from now on, they're going to ask me, like, how's that eating plan thing going on? And so,
But when I just think of this feeling like I just, and when I say these things, it's not because I'm perfect at them.
no,
It's kind of like it's a lesson to myself and a note to my brain saying to myself, like, I should be handling this differently in this idea of growth. So when we come up and we have these conversations, I'm like, oh, I could do better at this. And I think just, I reached out to somebody about collaborating recently that I had met and I really liked. And so she sent me a note after, like, I actually wondered if she had gotten my email or if she just wasn't and she sent me a very nice note saying, really sorry I didn't respond sooner. I am really interested. Why don't we get together and meet? And everything. And just the fact that I think she said to me, I'm really interested. I was busy, made all the difference in the world. It was this feeling of like, oh, okay, she is really interested. We all get busy, And so it was just kind of her owning that or acknowledging that for me,
Yep.
which was, you know, went a long way in the way I then now I'm going to react and respond. And it was interesting that I say that because of my conversation about taxes, because I really do want to meet with her, but I'm trying to budget I am trying to allot time for this for me to finish it. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to overextend myself and then be running around so much that I have no time, and that's causing me a lot of stress because it hasn't gotten done yet. So I'm like, okay, well, let me just put that meeting to next week because my goal is to be done this week in the next few days. So it was kind of like I kind of adjusted in my brain. I was like, this will happen, but also honor myself and the fact that I liked the fact that she acknowledged it.
Yeah, there's a whole social contract that I think you and I were raised in that I don't believe is being taught, you know, wide scale like it used to be. Our culture used to be built on my word is my bond, quote unquote. If I tell you I'm going to do X, I'm going to do X. And if I don't do X, I will tell you, and I'll either tell you I'm not going to do it, or I'll tell you that I'll make a new promise. However, I'm not going to go around making idle promises that first I don't keep track of, and that when you keep track of it, I'm going to make you bad and wrong, and it's going to make you be somebody who I have to avoid in the future because you're this pest who reminds me of when I lost my mind and didn't keep my promises. Okay. So it's kind of neat because that conversation that I just had, that little quickie there, that never happened in the past. If in the old days, if you made somebody a promise, they wouldn't remind you. They would just salt it away like, well, that's, can't count on them. And I remember listening to Buckminster Fuller, and he was talking about the whole notion of being of your word and being your word, and that when you make it a priority for yourself. And this is a guy who's not just a guy in a bar, get having a couple of pops and then thinking that he knows everything in the world. This is a man who, after he had his biggest failures in life, he decided that he was not going to say anything until no words came out of his mouth for over 2 years, until he had something that was worth saying. So that makes him very listenable in my book. And he went around the world. He circumnavigated the world on his speaking tours, I think over 30 times. But a conversation that I'm alluding to is the one of being of your word. And he said to give you a mental idea that your word should be so impeccable that when you say chair, just your speaking that word, a chair would fall out of your mouth. And that's in the nature of a Chinese koan, okay, or a Buddhist koan. To like, what is the sound of one hand clapping, or one of those things to which there's no answer to it, but to be able to hang out with the question and not have to come up with an answer. So the whole idea of being impeccable in your word, and managing your life so that your word means something everywhere you go, so you don't have to remember what you said the last time. And if somebody brings you up something that you genuinely forgot, that it's a contribution to you because they know you are a person who is committed to living a life of being impeccable in their word. Kind of
Hmm.
cool.
Hmm.
I don't know. Do you see that much these days?
Um, well, it's interesting. Um, because and it doesn't seem to be age in my encounter, it doesn't seem to be age specific. it seems to be much more, especially now that I am trying to make a lot more connections. Like since I don't know some of these people very long, it's it's me getting to know, whether that's just normal behavior for them, may not be normal behavior for me.
Yes.
And so some of that is, I think that, is it because, if I don't respond to an email or something, it's usually because I've missed it. It's not because I get too many and I overlooked it. And,
Right.
and I tell people, like, if you want to reach me, just, if you don't hear back from me via email, make sure you text me, because usually it is an oversight on my part, but an
Yes.
unintentional oversight, obviously. But some of the people that don't respond, I'm like trying to figure out, like, and I'm just learning, like, they don't, like, I think that's who they are for whatever reason. And it is kind of interesting to me as I navigate, because, like I said, it's not age specific. Like, some of these people are, you know, I think around my age or your age. And so it's kind of like, I'm like, this is very interesting. Like, as I sit there and I try to look, my word, not interesting, you know, like a curiosity kind of thing. My word is interesting. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is very interesting.
Yeah, and I do know you to know that it's not just a crutch phrase, just so that you'll sound interesting. But at the same time, when something is worthy of further examination or pondering, that's exactly what I'm talking about. When Bucky says, your word and your integrity of your word should be so strong that when you speak the word chair, a chair falls out of your mouth. Now, I think I heard him say that 45 years ago, maybe. It's always stayed with me. It's so simple in the approach. And it's not hard work. It is in the beginning because there's an intentionality in terms of remembering. And that's where the buddy system comes in really handy. So if there's something you want to accomplish in the world and you share it with somebody who you can count on to, in a friendly partnership sort of way, remind you of what you said, that you can then, and do it in enough time so you can complete your promise. That's the kind of partners you want to have everywhere you go.
I absolutely. But on the other hand, I think that, if I want to play kind of the opposite. So let's say I do have a friend who knows me quite well, and there are certain aspects of my behavior that, let's say, she will bring up, and it's things that I've worked really hard to try to change within myself, let's say.
Right.
And I think she a lot of the time still thinks of me as like the old me or what I used to do.
Yes.
And if I'm not doing, and I don't mind sharing what it is. I mean, I tend to be very anxious, and so I've worked very hard at trying to overcome like my anxiety. And when she says to me, "Well, you are an anxious person," it kind of annoys me, because I'm working really hard at not being that. And it's kind of like, I don't need you to remind me that I'm like that, because I know I'm like that, or that's my normal, like, kind of modus operandi, where that's the place I tend to operate from. And so you're reminding me that I operate from that place. It's
So
not very
that's
it's not very helpful. So, so it's interesting, because as I think about it, and she knows me really well, and I actually, and part of that is my responsibility. Like, I think of, for me, like, all of a sudden the other day, is I thought to myself, I think I need to just tell her, like, I'm working really hard at that. Like, so could you not bring that up as much as you do? Because, because I
So
am working
try
really.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, try this, Chan. Invite whatever she says, okay? However, arm yourself with a couple of comebacks in advance that are going to move the conversation forward, such as, do you know that this is a priority for me? And I love how you're, keeping me honest all the time. Would you do me a favor and would you let me know if I'm exhibiting behavior that's not like that? Like, I'm working really hard here to kind of put that behind me and to create this new open space where that's kind of shut me down before. How about, let's play a little game. Let me know if you see that happening. Let me know if I'm winning at it, would you please?
Yeah, because and it's so funny because all of a sudden one day, like she said it to me not too long ago, and I thought to myself, yeah, I guess and maybe it's a sensitivity on my part, is the fact that I just, don't want to be reminded of that all the time. Like I'm not, I have to sit with it a little bit too, and have to, realize what it's triggering within me when she says it. It's not just, so that's where that, interesting or curiosity comes in, where
Yes.
I'm like, okay, she says it, like, why does that bother me? Kind of thing. And not taking it for granted that it bothers me, or not like exploring that. Like actually honestly really wanting to look at it and say, okay, that's kind of an interesting thing that bothers me so much.
Yeah. For example, I mean, if you and I are on a quest at our age now that we're over 50, to pursue an equanimity that we've not experienced before in our life. And that's like a peacefulness and an even keeled sort of existence that is full of joy and full of wonder and full of awe. And not work. It's the antithesis of work. It's like fun, and play. So if we're in that kind of a space, I guess it's probably going to be very cool to spend a moment or two, maybe not to worry about so much why you behaved the way you did, but to maybe make a choice to whether or not it's serving you.
Right.
Like maybe that could even become a little joke. I have no idea why I'm doing that. And I'm not wasting another minute of my time trying to figure that out. Okay. Because whatever reason that I come up with will be the new reason that I feel that way. And so now I'm going to have to continue feeling that way anyway because I got a reason, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if you want to make a permanent change, sometimes you do need to explore some of those things, because I think that there may be a deeper reason which you're not very aware of. But uh I think there is a truth to what you say, to at some point say, does it really matter, you know, why I'm spending so much time here? Um, but then, I've been working with a client, and it was really interesting for me as I observed her, and I just wanted to bring her attention to what she did. So we did this beautiful, beautiful meditation, and she was really in a zone, like, probably the calmest she's been in months. And right away, she went to, like, we came out, and I want to say almost instantaneously, she went to what was bothering her before.
Right.
And I was like, why did you go there? Like, you were in this space of true peace and, balance, more so than you've been. So to me, what was the draw to automatically go back to whatever it was that was bothering her earlier? And partly I said it because I wanted her to realize what she had done.
Right.
Like the fact that she did go there. It, like not a, I would say probably a millisecond, like not even a second, it was just such a fraction of time.
Right.
And she even said to me, "I feel so much better now." And then the next thing was like, but yada 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 yada. And I was like, "Why did you do that?" Like,
Well, see, here's the interesting thing from my perspective in terms of hearing what you're saying. If you say I have a behavior I'd like to understand better, it's almost always a habit. Okay. 99 out of 100 times when there's some behavior that you have that's automatic and there's no thinking, it's just stimulus response, like a trigger, that's a habit. Okay.
mm,
So the question, to really embrace when it occurs is not to fight it or to justify it or all those kinds of things. I've had some extraordinary breakthroughs with people in terms of relationships at work and stuff like that with people that they find abrasive. Well,
mhm,
it turns out those people are fine, okay? That all the abrasion is going on inside of the person and their natural reaction to things that happened when they were a kid or whenever it was. That it
right.
might be useful for them to know why, but in the meantime, it was very freeing for them to realize that the other person didn't get a vote on how they reacted, that the person was not walking around the world laying in wait for this person to show up so that they could trigger them. I've been working on this trigger for days and days, and now let's see if it works.
Right, 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 right.
So does it serve you is a really cool question. You and I and our dear friend Ken, the better question that you can come up with, the more you get to learn from a circumstance, and you get to choose whether it's something you want in your life or not the next time.
Right, and I agree with you, it is a reflex,
Yep.
and I think it is and it is just like everything else. If you think of what a reflex is, it's an automatic response that just you're not even I mean, it happens so quickly sometimes because you've been doing it so long
Yeah.
that it's almost like, when it happens and you do it, it's almost sometimes with this to me with this feeling of like awe. Like it's like, "Oh my gosh." Like, I got here so quickly. It's almost funny,
Yes.
as I look at it. I'm like, "Oh, how," you know, "Oh my gosh, that was fast for me to get from here to there in like, a fraction of a second." And all of a sudden, but in a way that's what gives it such power, because then when you can automatically switch out of that
Yes.
really fast, or it happens and you like the next second it's gone, you're like, because you've actually thought to yourself, or said, that's, I don't need to go there or whatever. Then it's kind of fun because then you're like, wow, I just bounced right. I literally just bounced right out.
Yeah. If you recognize that there was no thinking that went into something in terms of your action, there's no need to come up with a reason or a justification for it to prove to yourself that you're still sane and you haven't completely lost your mind. But now you can actually say, wow, if that's just a habit, what other habit would I rather see there? And maybe I can work on putting that habit in place.
Yeah, I always think of the idea to me of like emptying out, like, what habit or what can I replace it with? So it's like, if if I decide that I'm going to replace it with something, what do I want to replace it with? And that's always, because I think that as people, we that feeling of kind of like emptiness, and I call that emptiness, is kind of sometimes disconcerting and uncomfortable. And so, kind of like, okay, well, if I'm going to replace it with something and I'm not going to do that anymore, what am I going to replace it with? And then it becomes kind of fun because then it's a choice. It's like, oh, what would I rather do instead of this?
Yeah. And again, there's a thrownness to have a dichotomy, which is you've got a right hand or a left hand, and that's it. It's going to be either the right hand or it's going to be the left hand. The right hand's what I've been doing. The left hand's going to be the new thing that I'm going to be doing instead of that. But what if your whole energy was not worrying about what was in your right hand,
Oh yeah,
but
no, no,
just, wow, what a cool opportunity to do this, and just laugh out loud when something really pisses me off, can I find humor in my response to the world? You bet I can. And will I have to be reminded by people who love me a few times? Probably.
no. Well, it's also the fact of like when people do things that are almost predictable, like in reaction or response, is can you find humor in that? Uh, and I've had things that have been in my life where I just like people behaving how I like basically thought they would behave and finding humor in that, like, almost realizing the humanness. Like this is, I've had circumstances where I feel like I'm living a Seinfeld episode. It's like, and just taking human behavior and realizing that's what people do.
Right.
Just kind of saying it and just taking it for that and just actually laughing because I could just see exactly like Seinfeld having an episode about what just happened because it's so, Seinfeld, Carol Nat, like all the really where they would find the humor in just ordinary life and reactions. And you realize that it's all true.
So the really cool thing, and what really is interest worthy, if you will, is if you get out of bed every single morning with the desire that today's going to be the best day you've ever had, can you even imagine what that day would look like to you? I have this um, new favorite YouTube series that I watch. It's this young couple. They are vagabonds. They started out probably 3, 4 years ago before COVID with a tent and a Hummer, just driving all around Arkansas in different campgrounds and cooking outdoors and swimming and just having a great life and then telling everybody about it in their YouTube adventures. And then at some point they replaced the tent with a tag along trailer, not one that they would sleep in. They still would, sleep in a tent, but it gave them a lot more room to carry things to wherever campground they were going to go to, so that they could have lights, that they hung from the tree branches, and they could have, all of these other cool things, a standalone shower that actually went through through the automobile and got the water got heated. And no, they had first world luxury when they're out in the middle of the Ozarks, which was really kind of fun. But the neat thing is that they're a young couple. I want to say they're in their mid 30s, and both of them left really responsible jobs. She was a CPA, and he was some kind of other white collar thing that they just said, we're going to throw that to the winds. They started doing all of this camping on weekends. And then they finally decided, let's sell our house. We'll put all that money in the bank and let's go see if we can make a lifestyle out of this. And let's see if we can make an income off of our YouTube channel, right? Well, they've now been doing it for almost 4 years, and it's working for them. I told you that story to tell you this one. Every single episode, the guy says, I'm having the best day of my life. I just love him. You know that? Can you imagine how wacko that sounds for most people to like walk into a room and somebody's saying, today's going to be the best day of my life? And he really means it. He's inventing today as that satisfying, wonderful occasion that's going to just bring him everything that he could dream of in terms of what that day was. I like it. I think it's kind of cool.
Well, it reminds me of David Stendhal Rast, who has a wonderful gratitude practice, and has he's a brother, and he goes through a lot, like, you know, can you look at this day as it possibly could be the last day, and can you live from that space of that realization, of realizing, like, you know, basically, can this be the best day ever? Can I live today, as and go around and appreciate everything around me as if, you know, this might be the only day I get? Um, Slightly different, basically the same. And it's really a beautiful, beautiful practice. And what you're talking about reminds me of that, because it really is this feeling of, you know, looking at what you have as opposed to what you don't have, and looking at what is there versus what, as opposed to what's missing.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy to just celebrate with no real reason to celebrate except for I get to breathe one more time, you know? And
Hmm.
you and I both know, especially with what we've been through with loved ones over the last few years, how precious looking forward to being with someone is, and how precious actually the feeling of looking forward to being with someone and then actually being with someone. I don't know. I found that they really couldn't do anything to upset how happy I was to be with them. After I looked forward to it for so long, I had so much tolerance for any behavior that they would have. And when, being around somebody with dementia as frequently as I have been in the last 5 years, um, that means I had to be up and ready to go at a moment's notice to meet them wherever they were in the universe, or kiss that relationship goodbye. And I was never willing to kiss the relationship goodbye. So it was really always just an act of love to hang in there with them and give them something to press against while they're saying what everybody else in the room is sure that they've lost their mind. But when you validate that what they're saying is reasonable by giving it a response that's in kind, you know, it just creates something in that moment that couldn't have happened otherwise if you're just going in and sitting in a chair waiting for them to pass.
Yeah, and it makes it, creates so much less agitation around, and having, had to learn that lesson. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, just debating, and whether, if it's not true, it's not true. But the debate that it isn't true is just so energetically draining for both parties, and demeaning for the person who's going through that dementia. But I think it happens with people, where you truly appreciate people. I
Yeah.
remember seeing my parents for the first time after the pandemic, or, when we after, like, finally when I saw them, and it was probably close to 2 years where I hadn't seen them. And considering I used to see them very often, that was like unbelievable. And just, the tears that came to my eyes, because it was just like, oh my gosh, and the feeling of what it's like to hug someone. And we've talked about this, just like that first time. And so, just the value of people. But I think this whole idea of just finding appreciation for things in your life, and in that way making it, like you said, this is going to be the best day ever.
Yeah. And then switching that to it is the best day ever. And no
Hmm.
matter what's happening to you, it brings you joy. And that is something that most people don't realize, that you and I get to vote on that. Our happiness is our own responsibility. And it's not a place that you visit, that's where happiness lives, or a person that you visit, that's where happiness is. Can't be happy unless I'm there. It's like, give it up. What if you just got to be a black belt at making yourself freaking happy all the time, everywhere, and they don't throw a net over you? I mean, what if it's just a really cool way of being that you're just always happy, always experiencing the best day of your life? What would that look like for people?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think people would have a a very different attitude about where they are in their life, what is happening in their life. Um, and I do think part of it all begins with gratitude and realizing, concentrating on the what you do have in your life versus what you don't. Um, and some of it is just like and it basically is, we get to choose what we focus on. I mean, that is a conscious choice, which is what I was trying to tell my client. And I actually was messaging her every day and, reminding her. Was telling her to send me something she was grateful for, like every day. Like, I'm grateful for this. And we did it for weeks and weeks and weeks of
Yeah.
just trying to shift out of that, maybe like, that aspect of self pity or and I'm not saying that I've wallowed, I've been in a place where I've sat in a place and I've wallowed for a period of time, but then realizing that that's a choice too, because I can choose to get up and wallow, or I can choose to get up and say, okay, well, I'm done with this. Like, I'm tired of myself almost. Like, I'm
Yeah.
tired of being in this space. I don't want to spend any more time with me.
I like that. I make myself sick. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. So stand up. If you're going to wallow, at least be in motion while you wallow.
Right, exactly, exactly. It's like, I'm tired of spending time with me.
Yeah.
And just like I've got to move out of this, and realize that, it really is a conscious choice. And I talk to her about this a lot, like that conscious choice of saying, okay, I can choose how I want to be today. Sorry, there's a bug. I'm sitting there.
I mean, that's a very powerful distinction. And what I guess probably what in my conversations with people over the last few weeks, I've found that the what I think a distinction is different than what other people do. And for I think for some people, especially those that are in the coaching kind of discipline, they think of distinction as something powerful to know. Okay. And I actually think that the term distinction relates to something that's an experience in you that's powerful to have, something that you can then rely on in the future, something that has become a habit, part of of who you are. So that when you're thinking about it in terms of a way of being, way of being is really powerful for somebody to to actually start thinking. It takes us back to that examination of behavior, with the idea that myself can be upgraded. It's not a small s for the rest of our life, like that's some kind of a sentence or something. You'll always be a very puny self. Okay, no, you can actually upgrade that sucker. You can make it as elaborate and as I mean, if you can go and get a, master's degree for your mind, and you can get a black belt for your body, and you can become a yoga master or mistress, for your body, the same thing is possible with your way of being. And if
Hmm.
you think about somebody who's just learning yoga versus somebody who's been an expert trainer and teacher of yoga masters for 25 years, the way of being is an acquired set of skills and habits that over time allows you to slow things down around you. So there's less that's upsetting. There's, less questions that are annoying, if you will.
Well, when you said a word that I just like, that was like the word to me that kind of keyed in and summed it up. And
Right.
that was the word experience. Because when we experience something, we feel it in our body.
Yes.
There is a sensation that happens within our body there is a somatic experience. There's an experience with the breath that happens, and so I think that is what, to me, like, martial arts does, and yoga, because it's very experiential, and so you begin to experience that. And so the difference is just talking about something versus experiencing it, which
Right.
it feels different. And sometimes the way that feels is similar for everybody, but sometimes it's slightly different. And so there, so it becomes very personal and very, deliberate. It's kind of like, and that's why when, I spend a lot of time with my clients saying, well, how did that, like, how does it feel? Like, that's what I mean. Because I think once we get that sensory experience, it's almost like we don't really need to, like, it's not even the habit or the thing. It's like, I want to get back to that experience, and what's going to make me feel like that. It becomes like, oh, I want to get back to that feeling. I know what this feels like in my body. I know how I feel, and that is worthwhile, and becomes almost like this quest, not in a bad way, but in a very good way, of trying to recreate that.
So it's very interesting, okay? And I'm going to use that word here with a multiplicity of meanings. First of all, it's interesting to look at the process of how teaching and training goes on. So there's a conversational, here's what you're going to be doing now physically with your body. And when you reach the end of this exercise, you will have time to kind of recapture your sentience and wake up to what's going on around you. And it's all language, okay? So there's no experience going on there at all. It's just one human being struggling to try to get the right words out for another human being to at least get a roadmap of where the heck they're going, with this physical exercise. And so the next interesting part of it is getting feedback as to whether or not your instructions were noteworthy and actually, you know, got in the way or enhanced the process of getting the experience that the person wants. And then the neat, really cool thing that happens afterwards is that with enough attempts at it and enough, practice and like really putting the time in and experiencing and noticing the nuance between when it seems to be working and then when it isn't working. And then now you've got to that point where you can recreate that experience at a moment's notice, as you were saying, Jan. And now you've got that really difficult time of putting it into language that another human being would find even useful.
Right. Well, that's why when people were to ask, if people ask me about yoga and everything, a lot of times, I mean, I'm a great teacher, but describing that experience is almost something that's beyond words. And so articulating it can be really hard, very challenging.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that, but just and some of it is the constant, the not constant in a bad way, but the questioning for the person, and the reminding to the person to kind of keep on going to, how does this feel?
Yep.
Like, how does this feel? What feels better, this or this? What? And so that constant kind of exploration, and I like the word exploration because it's kind of like reminds you that, oh, okay, and that might be different depending on the day, and where you are on that day very likely will be different because we're not the same. So, I always say that we, basically do the same poses over and over and over again, but they're different because we come to it from a different place every day. So it's never boring. because we're not the same. So, yeah, but it really is interesting. Is like you sit there and it's really that constant like reminding ourselves of like, how does this feel for me today? Where am I today? Um, besides for wanting to have the best day, kind of thing, which it will be, because if we live like that, then we're living experientially versus superficially, and we're not going through the motions. We're actually present.
Yeah, and I really think that, that opens up the doorway to authenticity,
Hmm.
which is genuinely being in the um, full contact struggle with having experiences that are difficult to explain in language. And by challenging the languaging of certain things to the point where over a period of time you determine what communicates better than something else, such that your attention is always on the listener and never on the speaker. The speaker is informed by the success and failure of the listener getting what the speaker is talking about. And if that's the deal, that's where you get that experience of having something work, where there's this like aha moment and it comes together. That's it. Oh, now it's gone.
but
Anyhow,
but I think that's when people, will ask me, and I think they finally understand that how applicable something like, let's say, martial arts or yoga is to everyday living,
yeah.
because it teaches you about being present.
Yeah, and I can hear you to the extent that I've done a little bit of both of those things, actually more martial arts than yoga. I did that for about 4 years, and then yoga I was doing for about a 6 or 7 month period of time when I got out of the hospital, and trying to recover my body again. And that was when I really got a lot of up close and personal humility, and what it felt like at that point to be, that was 20 years ago. So to be 50 years old and have a 50-year-old's body, where I'd always been a really good athlete, up through my mid 30s, and it wasn't there anymore. It was not part of my current experience at that point.
Well, I think that's what I mean. It is a really great way to learn humility. I mean, partly because if you practice, there's always stuff that you excel at and things that you find really challenging. And it is an exercise in humility. And it's also an exercise in humility when, like, let's say you are doing something and coming from an injured space and, realizing that and kind of having humility around that. And the frailty of the body, the fact that, the body is resilient or whatever, but and can recuperate, but can be challenging at times, as we all know, if you've ever gotten any sort of injury. And then all of a sudden there's a new element of like humility and acceptance and a whole bunch of other things that come along with that. But it is a true lesson for life, right? Because that's what life is.
Yeah, and I guess we've come full circle in the last hour to our accountability buddy,
That's
where
right.
in the beginning you talk about what an accountability buddy is going to be, but through being an accountability buddy over time you actually distinguish what accountability buddy really is in this particular instance, in our particular relationship. So
Absolutely.
any kind of wrap up comments that you'd like to make in terms of tying this all together, my friend?
Um, no, but know that we're, both Bill and I are here for you if you need us. Feel free to reach out. Uh, you know, find us on, wherever I mean, Bill's on Facebook more than I am, but I'm on LinkedIn quite a lot. So people can find me on LinkedIn or just do a Google search and they'll find my website. So, and I know that's really great. And we'd love to have a chat if you feel so, you know, if you feel so called.
Absolutely. I will say ditto, my friend. And in terms of signing off, I want to thank all of you for giving us your undivided attention for the last hour or so. And I also want to draw your attention to the fact that there are people out there in the world, friends of yours, who, unbeknownst to you, could use a hug, could use a telephone call or a text, or maybe, an email that basically says something like, I was thinking about it today, and I just want you to know that because you are here and because you're around, my life works. And I just want you to understand that anytime you ever need anything, you've always got a phone a friend with me. You just call me and I'll be there. But in the meantime, Jan, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Bill.
You're welcome. And we are lighting the candle, a world that works. And once again, I've got to have a wonderful conversation with my dear friend, Jan Jeremias. And again, signing off, I'm Bill Correll, and it's been a ball being with you today.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.